All right, so I think we have everyone coming in there. I know that's kind of an abrupt transition from some great networking and conversations you have into being sucked into the stage. So as I mentioned, for those of you who heard earlier, Remo is kind of two tools in one. It's kind of like a Zoom webinar, which is where you are now. So now you can't turn your camera on, you can't turn your microphone on. So this is where you really do need to use the chat function. You certainly on that right-hand side, you see participants. So you can see everyone who's here, and you can certainly chat, and then you can answer Q&A with folks that are here too. So let me go ahead and share screen to our run of show and the timing. If I can pull this up. There we go. So we just got done with the small group networking. Hopefully you like the Remo platform. We're going to do another survey at the end. Would really encourage you to tell friends about this. We think people are Zoom burned out, and this is just different. And I think that Remo networking, where you can change tables, you can see people, and you can move around, it's just a really cool function and a much better virtual networking. And so we want to continue to build momentum on the number of networking folks that come. And of course, as new people come, it makes the networking more interesting. So please consider inviting your friends. We're doing this every first and third Wednesday of the month now. So next, we're going to go into kind of community events and resources. Oops, my slide presentation is going backwards. Before that, a couple announcements that we want to continue to emphasize from Packard Place. Packard Place has this fellowship program to help new entrepreneurs. We particularly focus on traditionally underrepresented founders, but it is open to all new founders. And the idea that when you start a business, especially in the first 6 months, you don't need to be paying for rent and co-working space, and you need a whole bunch of resources and networks to be able to connect with. Obviously, the co-working physical space may be a little less important right now, but our space is open and socially distanced. So we do have people that are coming into our co-working community. But you can apply for the fellowship on the website, and the idea is that you get support as you get started as an entrepreneur, and if we can increase your probability of success and grow more great startups, we're happy to do that. So this is part of how Packard Place gives back on its social mission to build the entrepreneurial community in Charlotte. I think I missed one. Oh, and the founder office hours, there we go. We have a number of really successful founders who also want to give back. So we have founder office hours at Packard Place. It's open to everyone. You don't need to be a member of the Packard Place community, i.e. paying rent. We would love that, but you don't have to be, to meet with these folks and do open office hours. You can find that on the website as well. And I think Jasmine will be able to put the links maybe there in the chat. So you can go directly to the fellowship application and directly to the founder office hours. And if there's some of you out there that would like to do office hours, we'd love, Jasmine is purposely building the ranks right now to broaden that. Jasmine is our community manager at Packard Place. We'd love to have more people step up and say, yes, we can give back in this way. And then doing announcements, and I think, let me go back and check here. I think Juan Garzon is with us this evening. He is, and so Juan, I'm about to make you a presenter. So Juan, you should be able to turn your camera on now and unmute yourself. And I will stop screen sharing so that you can come on and screen share. And Juan comes in at our events to talk about Charlotte events, things that are going on. So I'm going to turn it over for a few minutes to Juan. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, thanks, Dan. And I'm trying to.
Oh, we might have lost Juan. We'll see if he comes back here in just a second. Somebody said, bye, Juan. Bill, you have a sense of humor, my friend. But go ahead and put things in the chat. I'll go ahead and talk about it as we're waiting for Juan to come back on. And Juan, if you can hear us, we cannot hear you. We just see a shadow that's there. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about our public house and who is going to be on tonight. So I'll go ahead and set that up as we're waiting for Juan to come back. So tonight's event at the public house is a great event I think you're going to like. We always joke that we do these because we don't have a chimney, so we get to do fireside chats at Packard Place. But we have a keg, so we do keg-side chats. William Bissett is going to moderate this. William has been very involved in the Charlotte entrepreneurial community, and the fact that he has also done a podcast series, which I wanted to talk about. And William, if you're listening, which I know you are, can you go ahead and put the link to your podcast series in the general chat. And if not, Jasmine will find it as we're talking and put it in there. I think you're over kind of 100 folks now. And then he's going to be interviewing Chris Langford. Chris, as I mentioned, was at Lowe's Ventures. Again, been very involved in the entrepreneurial community here in Charlotte for a number of years now, and has since joined Idea Fund Partners and is also the venture executive in residence, if you will, at the Davidson Hurt Hub. So I'm going to, I think William was able to do that. And let me go back, William, to find you. And I'm going to go ahead and make you a presenter. We may have to do one section here at the end. And so, William, I just made you a presenter. So you should be able to now turn your camera on and turn your microphone on at the bottom. There you go. And while I have you, and I'll do the same for Chris, so he can obviously come on stage here in a second. Can you tell us a little bit about the podcast series? I know you're here to interview Chris and not to have me interview you. But can you tell everyone about the podcast series you've done and how it started? Because you've been doing it for a number of years, and I'd love for everyone to know more about it.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to interview Chris. And essentially, what's the shorter format of my podcast, right? It's podcast is it's about a 55-minute podcast. Is that my fault, Dan, on the background noise? Okay. So good now. Okay. So no, I started the podcast in 2016 because I've been going to a number of Charlotte Angel Fund meetings, and I realized that while it was great to see the same 28 to 30 people every week, that I thought a city like Charlotte should have more than 30 people in the Charlotte Angel Fund, and started thinking about maybe the reason people weren't interested in the Charlotte startup scene is because they didn't understand it. I knew Juan was doing a great job with a newsletter already, and I thought maybe a podcast that was about the length of a typical Charlotte commute, interviewing entrepreneurs, investors, and those in the Charlotte entrepreneurial community would be a good way to go about doing it. And so I picked up the phone and I called Dan and Greg, and I said, Dan and Greg, I've got this idea. I want to try a podcast. Would y'all be willing to be some of my guinea pigs? So anyway, so Dan and Greg said, sure, just don't waste my time. And unfortunately, I think I wasted their time, but 105 or 106 podcasts later, I think we're doing a pretty good job these days. So the goal was to grow the entrepreneurial community or the startup investor community, kind of behind the scenes from what Dan and Greg and Juan and so many other fantastic people do.
Well, awesome. We're really happy as a community you're doing that. So, and Juan, I don't know if you're able to come back on or not. And so maybe we'll say, are you there, Juan?
I am. Yeah. I don't know what happened. Everything froze. I had to restart it.
Reboot. Why don't you try see if you can share screen, and William and Chris, why don't we turn our cameras off for a second? We'll give Juan the floor for a minute or two, and then we'll start the keg side chat. Okay, guys?
All right. So I'm sharing screen now. Everything didn't freak out. So hopefully we should be good. A couple resources that I want to make sure everybody in the ecosystem knows about. First, the Jules Accelerator is still accepting applications. This is our Charlotte Energy Accelerator. And one of the great things that they do is it's not just direct energy. They take companies that provide value in any kind of way around energy. For example, they had a drone company in the last cohort because they, Duke Energy was using the drones to test for, look for issues at some of their plants. So if you think in any way you could help or want to learn more about the clean tech or energy industry, definitely check out the Jules Accelerator at julesaccelerator.com. We have an organization, SBTDC, that provides some great programming, educational content for early entrepreneurs, for growth entrepreneurs. And they have their online training called Next Level that is for companies that are looking to grow their business in the next 6 to 12 months. Those will actually start next Wednesday. And they're going to be on Wednesdays for a couple months. So if you want to apply for that program, you can go to sbtdc.org/next level, and I'll put the link in the chat. Then another big one is the NCIDEA program. This is a statewide program that provides grants. So non-dilutive funding, they're not taking any of your equity. These are just grants that they're giving to early and growth stage entrepreneurs. They have 2 grant programs. One is the seed stage program that's pretty well known, $50,000 grant for companies that are looking to scale up. And if you're still in the idea stage, maybe you just have a couple things put together and you want to try to validate your idea, they also have a micro grant for $10,000 to help make those types of business ideas and concepts a reality. A lot of people who go through the process of applying for these grants saying that the application process alone is worth the time, because you get so much feedback on your application. Even if you don't get the grant, they say that it's worth applying it. And of course, the grant money doesn't hurt. So highly recommend you check out the NC IDEA grant programs. Then there is Venture Prize. Venture Prize is an entrepreneurship center that's run out of UNC Charlotte. Venture Prize, their launch program, helps companies with one of the most important facets of growing a business, and that is customer discovery. Understanding who your customer is, what they want, and how you can craft a business that responds to them. The Venture Launch program is right now taking applications, and they are going to begin a cohort here in September 2nd. So you have until then to go ahead and apply and have this opportunity to go through a very in-depth customer discovery program that doesn't cost you any money, and be in a cohort that provides a whole lot of amazing value. And last but not least, some of you may know I'm the executive director of Pitch Breakfast. We're a local organization that puts on pitch events for education and opportunities to practice to local founders. We right now are trying to get feedback from the entire community through a survey. And if anybody completes this survey before the end of the month, we are actually going to provide two $50 certificates to local startups. So, 2U Laundry or Skip Town or one of our local startups, we're going to provide you a $50 certificate. We're going to draw for two $50 certificates for anybody who can complete this survey by the end of the month. We're asking questions about our format and how we run the event to see how we can improve this. We've been doing this for 7 years, and we always want to take this opportunity to hear from the community to see how we can do things better. So pitchbreakfast.com/survey, and I'll put these links here in the chat. We really appreciate for you to take some time to fill that out. So that's all I've got. I'll throw these links here in the chat, and look forward to the conversation. If you have any questions, hit me up on chat.
Awesome, Juan. Thank you for coming and doing that every week. We really do appreciate it. William was giving me grief about my green screen. He wants to know if I can do the weather. I was trying to figure out what he meant in the chat, but there's going to be a storm front coming in right and so the other thing, Ernest is making me hungry because he's grilling chicken tonight, so my stomach is rumbling already. And then someone, Juan, put in there, maybe you could put this in the chat. It looks like someone just moved to the States and was looking to get connected to the entrepreneurial community of Charlotte. And I know I talked to someone in my breakout rooms, Dimitri. Maybe you could put the chat, Juan, the link to the session on the introduction to the Charlotte Startup Community session, and the link and the resource guide, because I know that that's something we'll want to continue to do and welcome people to Charlotte. So William, if you want to come back on, Juan, you can do that too if you want to say something. William, if you want to come back on, and we'll bring Chris back on, and we'll get them fired up and ready for their chat. So I will turn it over, William, to you to introduce Chris, and thanks to both of you for doing this tonight. Really appreciate it.
So no problem. The cold front just moved through, and we just had rain outside. So thanks for pointing it out to me. So Chris, I want to start this off the same way I start off every podcast, which is give me a 90-second commercial of Chris Langford.
Wow. Okay. I'm a partner at Idea Fund Partners. We invest in early stage companies across what we call the overlooked. So that's overlooked geographies, overlooked stage of capital, overlooked, demographics, if you will. And, my background is I've kind of an accidental VC, but want to stay. I spent the bulk of my career in corporate development, investment banking, and corporate strategy. But then I was able to convince the good folks at Lowe's to let me start a venture fund on their behalf about 6 years ago. And the way I describe it is once you once you get involved with entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship and venture, it's nearly impossible to go back to a normal day job. So that's me in a nutshell. I don't know if that's 90 seconds, but I think that's succinct, and that's probably the most succinct answer you'll get from me tonight.
That's probably fair. I've known you long enough to agree with you. See, you hit on it there. You started off in corporate VC world, and you've transitioned into, I guess, financial VC world. What's the difference between the two, and what does it mean for entrepreneurs? I mean, I think we have a decent mix of entrepreneurs and others on the call. So what's the difference?
Yeah, there's a number of notable differences between the two. I think one is, you only have one. So as an investor, as the person writing the checks, I only had one LP, if you will, right? So it's a lot easier to raise money, generally speaking, or you get your, if you're going to raise your fund pretty quickly. You only have one conversation to do it. That's obviously a huge thing, but truthfully, most corporate venture, one of the biggest things is that most corporate venture activities are evergreen in nature, meaning they're not time bound. So as an investor, as a corporate, I can put money into a startup and I don't really have a clock that's ticking on when it needs to be returned. Your CFO may have a different opinion on that, but generally speaking, you are not contractually, you're not under this gun to say, in 10 years, every investment that I make over the next several years needs to come back to me and be unwound so that this limited partnership can kind of go on its merry way. So I think one, it can be more patient capital. The other thing is the scorecard is very different. As a corporate venture investor, you might write a check because you'll learn something, right? So they call that strategic returns, or maybe it helps facilitate or fund a partnership with your base business. So we used to say there's 3 different ways that we generated returns at Lowe's Ventures. One was learnings, so help the strategy team make better long-term decisions. 2 was partnerships. So that's something where I wrote no check at all, but I brokered an introduction between a business unit and a startup, and they did something that was, positive for the company. And then the 3rd is we make a return on capital. And most corporate ventures, they rank in that order, So financial VC is quite the opposite. There's only one metric that matters, and that's IRR, right? That's the reason that you're doing what you're doing. So, I think, there's a ton of other nuances. I'd say as an entrepreneur, the biggest things, if you're going to contemplate, corporate versus financial VC, is one, understand who the sponsor is for the investment. Is it the investment team themselves, or is it tied to a business unit? Is it tied to a particular corporate program? How is that corporate venture program structured and compensated? Because you want everyone to be aligned, and sometimes my learnings and your outcome are not, not perfectly aligned at the very end. And I'd say that the biggest risk involved is that corporates, given that it's an evergreen, they can shut that funnel off too whenever they feel like. And so if you're inviting someone as an investor and the goal is for them to stick with you throughout the entire journey and fund you with follow-on rounds, that may be less likely with a corporate than it is with a financial VC who almost will always set aside some extra money for down the road.
Yeah, makes sense. So Lowe's Ventures is in Charlotte, North Carolina, not San Francisco, not New York, not Chicago or Austin. And same thing with Idea Funds, right? It's in Durham, not in Austin or, one of the other hotspots. As you look at quote unquote overlooked markets like Durham and Charlotte and Charleston and probably even to a certain extent, I already said Durham. What are they? What are overlooked markets, and how do you participate in them?
Yeah, so for us, I guess we could really call it two different things, right? So there's overlooked, and overlooked might be a term that just says there's this threshold amount of money and we don't get a lot of it, right? Um, that said, you could argue that many of those markets are also undeserving, right? So I think part of what we look for is what we call underserved, which is what markets we've been working on this data formula. So I'll probably spill a little bit of it tonight. It's not publicly disclosed, and it's probably not even internally disclosed because I've been working on it all day in different forms. But we've actually been looking to quantify, right? We boiled it down into a really simple formula that breaks down into a bunch of components. And the first part is ingredients, right? Does the city have the ingredients necessary to produce big venture outcomes? And that's a large enough population, a number of an educated population, a technical population, et cetera, right? So are those ingredients in place? Do they have what it takes to kind of build to support something like that? The second is outcomes, right? Is there an entrepreneurial spirit to the city? Do they consistently start businesses? And do those businesses return capital to their investors, right? So as a financial VC, really there's two ways to think about, we always try to boil down the concept to focus on what matters, right? What's the one thing that matters? And the easiest thing to say is, exits more than $100 million or private valuations greater than $1 billion, right? Both of those events generally give me liquidity as a seed investor, and at some kind of a multiple that's commiserate with the risk that I'm ultimately undertaking. So for us, one of the things so we started with this idea of what cities, we looked at all the cities in North America, and we said, what cities consistently produce $100 million exits and $1 billion private company valuations? And then obviously we sort of took out the obvious ones at the very top, and we began to stratify them into layers of, and they actually form these really neat bands, shockingly, between them all. So that's kind of the second piece of it. So it's ingredients is the first one. Tell me you got lots of people and they're smart and they're technical and they're entrepreneurial. Second one is when they get a chance, do they produce, big outcomes on the back end, things that can produce money for venture funds? And then the third is actually a minus for us, which is competition, right? How many VCs are there? How much venture dollars are flowing into that particular place? And the reason that that's a negative for us is that, that typically means that there's more competition for term sheets, pricing goes up, and it becomes harder, particularly if I'm sitting in Charlotte and I want to go, say, source Chicago. If there's a ton of money swimming around Chicago, that's very difficult to do remotely, which is why we typically stay out of the San Francisco, New York, Boston type ecosystems, because there's so much local capital that to try to do it from another coast is pretty difficult. So that's, there's a bunch of factors and a lot of things to unpack within there, but generally speaking, those are the main elements that we're ultimately looking at to see whether or not a city deserves more money, I guess is a better way to ultimately describe it. You're on mute.
Technology. Gosh, when's somebody going to fix it all for me? And I haven't even had a drink like you yet. But so on that, I mean, when you look at overlooked markets and you think about idea fund partners, how do you develop that strategy for the next, because y'all just raised a fund a year-ish ago, right? So how do you take the overlooked strategy from here to the next 10 years and the next fund and beyond?
Yeah, I think, so part of what I'm working on right now is zeroing in specifically on the geographies that we think deserve more money, right? So the ones that are producing good outcomes and the ones where, the ratio of businesses formed to businesses receiving capital is not high, or not at the same kind of level that some of the more mature markets are. So I think it starts with that basic analysis to just pinpoint areas that we think we want to focus on. I think from there, what we're looking to do is kind of twofold. One, we want to partner with people locally in those markets to serve as boots on the ground for us, right? So nothing will substitute for being there and beating the bushes all the time, and we don't have an unlimited travel budget or unlimited desire to be away from our house, and so what we're looking to do is actually, as we settle on these maybe handful 8 to 10 cities throughout the United States that we think represent these underserved and overlooked markets, we want to find someone to kind of play this role that we call venture partner, where they beat the bushes for us in exchange for kind of some participation in the fund itself. I think secondarily, it's us, kind of carving that up and going physically on a pretty regular cadence to go source those markets in person ourselves, to build relationships with the accelerators, the notable entrepreneurs, the perhaps even the investors that are one stage below us, whether that's angel or a seed fund, depending on whether we're looking at kind of seed extension within that market or Series A or true seed. So really just trying to have both a physical presence, but then also establish some boots on the ground to help kind of to drum up some of those businesses. And then finally, I think we'll do our own, prospecting from away, right? So we'll use databases, we'll follow trends, we'll follow, news within those particular markets of businesses that pique our interest, that align to our investment theses and stage of capital, and we'll just pick up the phone or shoot an email and begin a conversation and dialogue with them.
So on that note, Chris, because Charlotte probably, when we think about the number of VCs here in Charlotte, it's not a high number, right? And so if we're thinking about from an entrepreneur's perspective, how did they show up on that radar for the outside VC that's looking into Charlotte to say, hey, what's going on? There's because we haven't even talked about it, but I would imagine Charlotte stacks up fairly well on your overlooked market thesis. So maybe if you want to touch on where Charlotte fits on the overlooked market thesis, and then how does somebody get their name to the top if somebody's looking from the outside, trying to come into Charlotte and get plugged in real quick?
Yeah, we'll start in reverse there. So Charlotte does not perform very well on the overlooked market.
The interview's over.
I know. Burn me at the stake. And that's the truth. I think that pains me to say, because there's a lot to be excited about. There's a good handful of young and new entrepreneurs in town that I think are doing a great job with their first ventures. And many of whom, I would gladly, or I'm excited to look and see what they do in the future, right? Maybe their venture's a little past where we are today. Maybe I couldn't get comfortable with the market as I saw it. But I think there's a handful of I think there's a good 10, 12 really solid first-time founders here that will do something with their companies. Several of them will probably move on and do it again. And so I think I'm excited about that. I'm excited that, there's plenty of wealth in Charlotte. So we have that ingredient here. But, one stat, so this is a fresh off the presses stat, right? So we looked at 33 markets across North America, all of basically every market that had more than 2 million people within the MSA. And Charlotte had by far the lowest percent of so we did this analysis of how many total businesses were formed since 2015 and how many of them got angel, accelerator, or venture backing. And this is all per PitchBook, so take it a little bit with a grain of salt. This is not perfect information, but Charlotte was exceedingly the lowest percentage funded right? And so, I think one of the things that's scary is, for venture people to be attracted to the region, one, they need to know that there's an angel base that's there that's building a pipeline, of people that are there. And then secondarily, they need to know that there's capital and that there's talent there to scale the business fast enough, right? Because as I kind of mentioned before, as a financial VC, the day I write a check, you're on the clock, right? You got somewhere in the 7-ish year range to give me about, hopefully 50 times my money back. And that's a pretty big undertaking. That takes money, that takes long days, long weekends. So I'm excited about how young and how fast growing Charlotte is. And I'm excited about a handful of entrepreneurs, but this is not a risk-taking town, right? And you see it within the capital. You see it within what I call the Charlotte lifestyle syndrome, which is, if you're fairly educated, it's not that hard to make $150,000 a year working in Charlotte, and probably a lot less hard than you would having to build your own business. So I think Charlotte will end up falling into that. We're gonna take a flyer on this market. I'm not lying. I'd be lying if I said it's probably not it's probably because I live here, right? But it doesn't perform exceptionally well in a pure data analysis, right? But I feel good that there will be some really good outcomes. I think another thing that has to happen is the couple of big private companies, right, that will have big outcomes, that money needs to flow back in, right? They need to kind of flow that money back into the ecosystem. I mean, that's how all these other ecosystems generally got built and really perpetuated. So I think that's kind of, there's a lot more to, again, unpack within the concept of Charlotte, but I think that's kind of the general perspective of it all. And then I'm sorry, what was the first question? I got so rambling on this thing.
You just lost like a whole bunch of free lunches that you might have gotten otherwise, just for reference point. So the secondary question was, recognize that Charlotte has its own struggles, right? And so there's not a lot of money that sits here, but there's money that comes into Charlotte from time to time. I mean, look at the folks that come into town for dance conferences. And Sam Smith had some folks coming to town from outside for her conference as well. So when people look at Charlotte, how do founders raise their profile without taking out a billboard advertisement during those conferences so that people know who they are, right? How can they be spotted easier?
Well, I think part of it is working with folks like Charlotte Inno and other people to try to get their name out there. And hopefully there are people that are kind of scouring those, maybe even finding a TechCrunch writer or someone like that to do a story on what they're doing. But I think 9 times out of 10, what needs to happen is, the founder needs to find some resources, whether that's at Packard Place or somewhere else, to help them put together a target list of people that they want to, they probably need to initiate the contact, right? So a good example is, I don't know if you know Bianca Carewell, right? But, she was gung-ho from the start, right? I know what Southeast Venture's about. I know what trying to raise money in Charlotte's all about, and I'm going to be proactive. And they were very deliberate in, creating a list of all the VCs in New York and San Francisco and LA, getting introductions in where they could, reaching out as well. And, again, they're crushing it, which helps, but at the same time, they raised a big oversubscribed round from a notable Silicon Valley VC. And that's what you got to do. I mean, the first thing is you can't be at like an angel stage and reach and think that you're going to get money from outside the region, right? That's got to be hyper local. But I think once you get beyond that, it's, as a founder, it's your job to capitalize the business. And that starts with spending time finding out who invests in your space, who invests at the stage that you're looking for, whether that's going to Packard Place, reaching out. I mean, reach out. I always tell people, reach out to me on LinkedIn. You want to meet somebody, I'll determine whether or not I think that's, I'll give them a double opt-in option, but we'll help. And I think if you're in Charlotte, beyond the couple of events that bring people in from outside, you're going to have to do the legwork to go and reach out to people outside of the ecosystem. And that's your job as a founder.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see. Real quick, just stay with you for a second, just to kind of talk a little bit more about you, and then I'll come back. I think we've got about 7 more minutes. Why'd you make the jump from Lowe's, a corporate VC, over to Idea Fund?
That wasn't exactly my own choice. So I'll make that one short.
Yeah.
Management changeover at Lowe's. Management changeover tends to be the kiss of death for corporate venture capital programs, because it's a very ancillary, non-core thing to do. And so, we had very specifically focused away from our core business of things that we wanted to invest in, and we had a pretty strong thesis, well beyond the concept of retail that we were investing in. And so, by the time the new management team came in and we said, this is what we do, and they said, well, that's not what that's not what we want to do going forward. And so it was time, so Lowe's Ventures no longer exists.
Yeah.
And like I said, once I got involved in venture, I knew that I couldn't get a real job again. So I had to move on to someone that would take me.
So what's been different for you as the VC, right? Right. What's been your learning curve over the course of the last 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to a financial VC, right? So you've got to raise money yourself, right? So we're not that much different than the startups that we fund, right? Every couple of years we go out and we have to beg, borrow, and steal to raise the capital that we ultimately are able to invest. So, we're never more than probably a year and a half away from a next fundraise. That generally takes about a year and a half to 2 years. And so I think that's always challenging, that sales role and trying to find investors and taking a portion of my time every week to go out and talk to people who could be potential LPs is definitely a learning curve. The reporting infrastructure is obviously a little bit more robust. At Lowe's, we had a spreadsheet with the 10 or 12 investments that we had, and we met quarterly with accounting, and we said, this one's still got a bunch of cash and it hasn't been marked up, so that's good, right? And we've got a little bit more diligence to our audit there at Idea Fund on that end. I think the other is, with Lowe's, we had a pretty I wouldn't say unlimited, but a really hard to hit the limit travel budget with what we were doing. I was on the road sometimes every week, but most of the time every other week. And it was easy to be local capital in San Francisco and New York and other places when you get on a plane all the time. It's challenging managing to an expense structure, right? When you're trying to make an expense ratio work. So, that's always a different take on it all. And then the final piece is, I could shoot an email to anybody in my space and say, hey, I run a venture fund for Lowe's. And that's pretty much a 99.9% response rate on those type of emails. So, it's a little bit more, you have to have a little bit more sharp edges or sharp elbows, right? And you've got to hustle a little bit more to get at deals, get at founders as a financial VC. And then there's just a lot more on the sort of administrivia side than there was previously.
So we just got the 5-minute wrap up notification. So we'll kind of end with this. You're in Charlotte. You mentioned that we've got some, you'd call it 10 or 12 founders. I'd say probably a fair amount more than that. I like friends, I like people. And I think we have more people moving into the city, but how do you pass on do you pass on investment opportunities, right? Is it a soft pass? Is it and talk to entrepreneurs about what it means when somebody says no, and what do they have to do differently, or just nothing else? It's just the next phone call.
Yeah. Yeah, I have this conversation a lot. So most of our job is saying no. On a bad year, we'll look at 1,000 deals, and on a good year, we'll do 6, right? So that gives you a pretty good ratio of how often we're saying no. The thing,
it sucks for the entrepreneur. It sucks when somebody tells you no on a capital raise, right? So, I mean, what's the no?
It sucks to say no. It sucks to say no, right? I want to say yes. I want to go on a ride. I think it's fun, right? So, I'd say the no's fall within a couple of different buckets, right? So there's this just doesn't look ready. I'm not interested in this at all. And that might be 30-40% of the things that come in. It's just people sending me stuff. Oh, I've got a hot dog cart or whatever. And I'm being a little bit facetious, but it's something that's obviously not venture backable. So once you get past those, right, then it gets into this meat, right? And there's a lot of reasons we say no. You might be asking for too much money. You might be asking for too little money. The round might be too late or too early. You might be in a space that we have absolutely no expertise or no strategic value to add, and we just don't think it's smart for us, right? It could be that you caught us at the back half of our fund cycle and we are prioritizing later stage deals over early stage deals, or you caught us in the early and we want to swing at some home runs and you're kind of like a double type thing, right? There's all kinds of reasons that the other is I might have 4 other deals I'm working on and you're the 5th best one. You might end up being the 5th best one that quarter, but I've only got so much bandwidth, right? So there's all kinds of reasons that we end up saying no. I hate it every time. I would say, 70, if I don't spend considerable time with you, you'll probably either get a not a good fit, thanks for reaching out type email, right? The other 25% of people who kind of make it farther down the funnel where I actually spend some time and look at your documents, I have one hard and fast rule. You will get an email from me and you may not like it, but you will know exactly why I said no. You may not agree with it, and I'm not going to listen to why you want to rebut my thinking on it. I don't have enough time for that, but I will always try to be extremely explicit about the reasons that I pass. If you have given me your time and that consideration, then you deserve to get 5 or 10 minutes for me to sit down and draft you a very long form email that thoroughly explains the reason why we passed. So you can only do so many of them, right? And like I say, there's so many reasons that we could say no, and 99 times out of 100, it's not because your idea is bad or you're bad. It just doesn't fit for what we're looking for at that moment in time.
Yeah. So, or you're in a market like Charlotte.
Yeah, that's not it. I'll invest in Charlotte. I tried to invest in Charlotte once or twice, but
well, you will by the end of this fund cycle. How's that?
I'm sure of it.
Yeah,
I'm sure of it.
So, well, Dan, you want to? We're 6:29, and I've been told explicitly that we don't go over 6.
Yeah, you're not allowed to go long. Hopefully, Jasmine will put here in the chat just for a second the survey link to get some feedback. But William, Chris, thank you guys very much. I thought that was awesome. Enjoyed listening to the chat discussion and appreciate you coming on to do that. We'll be back, like I said, the first and third Wednesday of every month with really interesting speakers. A big shout out not only to William and Chris, obviously, but to Jasmine Boyce, who's our community manager at Packard Place. She's kind of behind the scenes, but makes sure all this happens, does the promotion, gets the community partners. We're thrilled to have her there. So thank you all for that. And I think that's it. So thank you all very much.